Hi, I'm Lindsay Steffen with Wellspring on the Air. I'm a licensed mental health counselor at Wellspring, and I'm here today with Tova Krebs, who is our president and co-founder. Hi, Tova. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Lindsay. I'm glad to be doing this part two of a really important topic.
Yes, so we did part one last week. We talked about suicide. We talked through warning signs, risk factors, myths about suicide. So please go back and listen to part one. We have it on our website, wellspringmiami.org, and also on the podcast app on your phone, iPhone or Android. You can go to Wellspring on the Air and you could subscribe and follow and catch all of our shows from previous weeks and months. So today, we're going to dive into part two. We're going to go a little more practical, a little more nitty gritty. So Tova, why don't we dive in and just talk about why do people actually commit suicide and how can we help?
Okay, so when we think about how we can help, I want to talk about it first from a very broad perspective by just talking about why do people make this choice and then how do we intervene, and then we'll get really nitty-gritty practical, like what do I say and what do I do. So which is why we made this a two-part series, and I do want to encourage people to go back and listen to part one. We debunk a few myths, just catch up on all of that part one, but as we move on, here we go. So how do we help? Well, it depends on why the person is actually thinking about suicide. So one reason, probably a very prevalent one, but not the only reason, is that they have unclear thinking. In other words, there is a mental illness or a substance abuse that's happening that changes their thinking. So, for example, depression can have you thinking such negative thoughts you just can't remember the positive anymore. It's only the negative. That you can self-loathe to the point that you actually believe everybody's better off without you. Obsessive thinking is another example of a mental illness that might have, like it's getting stuck on a broken record where it's just the same thing over and over again. Well, if you're stuck on the idea of dying, then that can be a cause for that.
Right.
Substance abuse, you're not in your right mind. People take risks every day because they're under the influence that they wouldn't take if they were in their sober right mind. And so unclear thinking. And what do we do for people who have unclear thinking? We get them professional help. Because
Right.
there is a mental illness, there is a need for professional help. There is a substance abuse disorder. They need professional help. So, how do we help people who have unclear thinking? We get them help because it's complicated. Secondly, some people are considering suicide because they have what they believe to be unbearable circumstances. This is not a mental illness. This is just circumstances they think they cannot live through. So it could be a man who's had a moral failure, or a woman, a bankruptcy, something that is like, this is so big, now it's exposed, and I can't get through this. I can't face it. I can't face it with my family. It's too hard to face. It could be abuse, a woman in domestic violence, a youth who's trapped in a home with abuse, they can't face it, or even a youth who's facing bullying at school. I can't go back to school one more year or one more day and have this happen to me again. And so it's unbearable circumstances. Life after a trauma or a loss is an unbearable circumstance. So, and really that is like, I've had such a major thing happen to me. I can't see my life after this alteration, after this medical issue, after this loss of a loved one. I can't picture life without it. I can't see myself. And a terminal illness is similar. It's unbearable circumstances. I'm going to go early because I can't bear the circumstance of the process.
Right.
So that's the second. And then the third is, the answer to that is that we need to come alongside of them and love them, right?
Yeah.
I think go ahead.
Well, we have to connect them. Sometimes professional help, like you're saying, but we also play a key role in holding hope for them, loving them, being there for them, affirming them that you're not a burden. I love you. We're not better off if you leave, if you go. I think they need to hear those things that we take for granted. We're like, of course, that's to me a silly idea that you think that, but we have to really verbalize it to them, I believe.
That's right. So getting professional help, there is help. I can take you there. I can go with you. But on unbearable circumstances, I'll love you through it. I can be with you in it. Life can go on. I have a picture for you of your life when they don't have it. Like you said, holding hope for them. And then the third one is that they have a hopeless future. So this really relates more to the elderly, maybe, people who are in isolation, people with chronic illnesses, or people with a helpless life situation that they just can't ever see it would ever be better. It may be living in poverty, it may be living in an abuse situation or a violent situation, and they can't see that there's a future for them. But there is.
Yeah.
And we can hold that hope out for them, and we can love them in it.
Yeah. So let's go a little more into that. I think our audience always, they love practical tools is the feedback I get. So how can we be supportive? Let's go even deeper into that.
All right, so I think the first and most important thing is that we speak up. We need to speak. And a lot of us are afraid to talk about it. We hear that we have a teenager in our home who's worried about it, but we talk to our cousins and our grandparents and the aunts and uncles and the school teacher, and we actually don't speak to the youth. What are you thinking about? How are you feeling, you know? And we don't need to be interrogating them, but we need to speak. We need to speak up.
Yeah, I think too, when I work with youth a lot and they want to be noticed, they want someone to care more than anything. So I think sometimes parents even can feel awkward or not know how to breach that. But I think just being yourself, being the loving parent who you are to them, coming alongside of them, showing them that even though it's hard to talk about this, it's important enough that I want to, like, we can have this awkward conversation and hopefully, you know, then have more of an openness together, a closer bond.
Yeah, and being yourself is so key. We don't have to have the right words. We just need to speak about our feelings. I'm worried about you.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you're having these thoughts. You know, I find myself thinking about the fact that you seem kind of depressed. And so that's just you speaking and you being yourself in the situation.
Yeah. And I love that right there for adults or youth, but you're
Yep.
showing you take them seriously. Like, I care about your feelings. I can tell that things aren't okay. And I'm not going to brush it off or, oh, you're a moody teenager. I'm actually going to attune to you and try and draw that out and figure out what is going on. Do we need to do something?
And it shows you noticed, you know. And the next thing would be in speaking up has to do with speaking up and then listening. So listening is really important, and it can be terrifying to listen to someone while they tell you about why they think they should die. It's can be like we can just shut it down and say, well, you have to get help, or you can't think that, or whatever. But we need to just zip it, be present and listen. So they get, sometimes they just need to vent it and they'll self-correct. Sometimes they just need to walk it through. So even if you're going to jump in very quickly and get help, as long as they're talking, don't cut it off. Keep listening, no matter how negative it is, and don't counter it. And we'll get to some of the what not to do, right? But listening, being yourself, listening, being sympathetic without judging, being calm and patient. And I'm just going to hear you out. What's in your mind? And tell me all about, on the inside, you may be dying of fear, you know?
Right.
Or anger. How could you think this? Or how could you think about leaving me? Or, you know, we get all these strong feelings, but on the outside, we need to be listening and sympathetic and offering of hope, right?
Awesome. Yeah, you're not letting your own emotions take the spotlight. It's more, you're still attuning, being sympathetic to them, even though your anxiety or whatever is through the roof at that point. So, all right. Well, let's move on just to talking about what not to do. So those are things to do: listen, be yourself, offer hope, be sympathetic, take them seriously. But what should we not do, Tova?
Yeah, and this all relates to speaking up. So it's a little bit about what not to say. So
very
practically, don't argue. So speaking up does not mean, well, you're wrong, you shouldn't do this, or God will judge you, or you should be grateful for what you have, or you shouldn't think that way. When we start arguing, we actually push them into more hopelessness, because it really says nobody understands me.
Yeah, and you're not allowed to feel this way, but they're like, I do. And now they just feel ashamed for feeling that way.
So now they feel bad, depressed, and ashamed. Depressed and judged, or unheard. Yeah. So we don't want to lecture them about the value of life or anything like that, Another don't on the speaking up is to be super shocked. Now, again, we may have to fake it a little on this one, because we are shocked when our loved ones say these things, especially if we see so much value in their life. And so when they say, I don't have it, we're like, huh? But But being super shocked, like, I can't believe you'd say that, and is actually just not helpful. In other words, saying, normalizing to some degree, people have these thoughts and feelings and they
Yeah.
pass. So we
Right.
kind of normalize it. You can have this thought, but then you'll talk yourself out of it very soon, and life will go on, and you'll be okay. And so we want to not think it's the most horrible thought in the world. Think about the statistic we said on the other show. 1 in 4 young adults has seriously considered suicide in the last 30 days. Terrifying
Wow.
statistic. But
Yeah.
but it shows you how common it is to at least have the thoughts. And so, we don't want to be shocked.
Right. Yeah, you're kind of normalizing. There's nothing so wrong with you that we can't come back from it, right? This is
Right.
unfortunately a common thought, especially if you are in
Yes.
that 18 to 25. So I think another good one that comes up for me is not to promise confidentiality. I think
Mm.
sometimes it's like, oh, can I tell you something, but you can't tell anyone? I've learned as a therapist early on, I never make that promise. I'm like, nope, probably even legally I might have to. But yeah, even with our friends and family, we can't promise them that we're not going to say something, because that's a promise we would need to break for sure. Even if you have made it, that's one you can break, because we need to get people the help that they need, professional
Yeah,
help.
if someone's life is at stake, we can't keep their promise of secrecy. And if we do and they take their lives, we're left with that. I actually knew, and I didn't do something because I swore to them I wouldn't tell. So that's a very dangerous thing. So not promising that. Another thing is to offer to fix their problems, like jumping in with, well, I can do this for you, or I can make your, I know you're depressed, so, maybe a parent, well, we'll get you a car, or we'll get you something, we'll make it better. And really, it's not so much about circumstances as it is a way of thinking. And so we can't fix their circumstances. We really can love them in it. But that view that my life is actually something they have to fix through help, through hope, through our love. Um,
Yeah.
but we can't fix it for them.
Yeah, you can't fix their feelings or change them in that moment. So, and again, I think another good one, especially for parents, but even just family members, friends, is not to blame yourself. So, and especially don't start verbalizing that, like, oh, what should I have done? Like, don't make it about you in that moment. And
Mm-hmm.
even privately, notice that this is a mental health issue, or else an emotional distress so severe that it has nothing to do with you. It's really just their mental state and where they're at in that moment. So,
Yeah, we really are not, we don't have the power to control other people's happiness
yeah.
or sadness. We can influence their lives, we can do a lot of things and love them, and we can have a lot of influence, but we're not actually responsible for their happiness or sadness. Parents, I think, have the hardest time with this, because we want to make our kids happy,
Yes.
and then when they're not, we think it's our fault, but it may not be. It may be in their control and something they have to find a way out of with our
Yeah.
help.
We have been talking about suicide prevention tips. So, in the first half of the show, we talked about speaking up if you're worried, what to say, what not to say. And now we're going to keep going with tip 2, which is to respond quickly in a crisis. So, Tova, why don't you tell us a little more about that?
Okay, so I think this one is important in that there are times we need to not think about it for a week or two about what to do. Like, we need to take an action now. So the question is, what's a crisis? So let's talk about a crisis. So somebody says to you that they've been thinking about suicide in any way, and you have the courage to speak up and you say, is this something that, is on your mind or whatever? Somehow it comes to light. You found a letter, whatever it is, it came to light, and you have this conversation. You have the courage to speak up. And they say, yes, I am thinking about suicide. Okay, it's at that point you need to ask some very, very specific questions very quickly. Not rapid fire interrogating, but don't leave them alone before you get these answers, okay? So the first one is, do you have a suicidal plan? So they say, yes, I'm thinking about suicide. And the question is, well, do you have a plan? I might ask it, if you did that, how would you? That's a similar kind of way to get at, do you have a plan? That's the first major question. If they say, well, yes, I have a gun by my bed and it's loaded, or I have this bottle of pills, or I've always imagined, cutting myself, and, I think my bathtub is the best place, whatever those horrifying thoughts are. But if they have a plan, you need to ask the next question is, do you have what you need to carry out your plan?
Right. Do
You
you
know,
have a gun, those
a
pills
gun.
at home? Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, I'd always thought I'd die by cutting my wrist. Well, do you have knives in your house and things that you would do that. Oh yeah, I have one picked out.
Yeah.
That's where you need to. So do you have a plan? Do you have a means? So the third question is, do you have a time set? And so do you know when you would do it? And if they have an answer, yes, sometime this weekend or in the next month or whatever, they have a plan, a means, and a time set.
Yeah.
And then the direct question, do you intend to take your own life directly right now? Like, how strong is their intention? So plan, means, time set, and intention. If we have those things, or even some of them,
Yeah.
we need to take immediate action, like not leave the person alone until we get some sort of response. Now that may mean calling 911 and
Hmm.
having the police come, and we tell them they have these plan, means, time, and intention, and they take them to a psychiatric inpatient unit. It may mean we go with them so they don't have to go in a police car, which is a very scary thing. They're going to handcuff them. It's a scary thing. So I will drive with you. I will stay with you. I will call a professional, but I'm not, somebody is going to stay with you until help and other external help is gotten. So this is the
Right.
respond quickly in a crisis.
Okay, that's good. And yeah, and I think kind of our rule of thumb, if you have a plan, as a mental health counselors, if there's a plan, then the thinking is very severe at that point. So
Mm-hmm.
definitely taking it seriously. We want to encourage our audience, they say, oh, but everyone has knives in the house. But yeah, but they actually have decided to use a knife, and that's much different. Or there are pills, there's a gun. So if they have that moment where they're feeling so low, feels like, okay, this is it, it's a likelihood they'll do it. So let's
Mm-hmm.
go more into that though, the level of risk factors.
Well, I think we've kind of implied it here, some it's low. If they have some thoughts, then it's about getting them into professional help. If it's moderate, they have suicidal thoughts but no real plan that's lethal, kind of vague ideas. A high risk would be suicidal thoughts with a specific plan and the means, and severe is they got a date and time in mind, and so, but all those we need to respond by removing the means and not leaving the person alone and getting professional help.
Yeah.
All three of those things when if it's a high risk, and that's kind of a scary thing. Sometimes parents, family members kind of go into a little piece of denial here because this can't really be true, and so that denial can paralyze us. And so that's why we have the show. We don't want people paralyzed. We want people to say, oh my gosh, I really need to do this.
Right. And those next steps, I think that's really helpful. Just either you can Google, look up the nearest mental hospital or ward next to you. You take them yourself is best case scenario. But if they're unwilling to go, then you do call 911 and Baker Act them for their own safety. And most likely one day they will thank you. So I think that's not something to worry about.
And they will beg you not to, but you don't want to live with that. You don't want to live with carrying that responsibility for something you can't control. You can't, may not be able to stop them. And so you really do want to pass that on to them. And you can say that truthfully. I know you're going to be mad at me, but I couldn't live with it if you weren't here.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
that's tough love. That's doing the hard thing
tough.
in
It's
love,
really
right?
hard.
But
It's
it
very
is the
hard.
most loving thing to do. So, well, let's move on to tip 3. So, offering help and support. This is kind of, it's been a theme throughout the whole show and how to
Mm-hmm.
do that. But let's talk about help and support before an event and even after a follow-up treatment.
Yeah, I think there are times that what happens is people say, oh, I get them to professional, and then they let go. When really professionals are only in your life for a little while. What we really need is people who love us and are with us. So it's
Yeah.
about supporting that professional. And so being a listener. How did it go when you went to the counselor? What happened? How do you feel? And listening, and just being present so they know that someone's checking up on them. So you went to the doctor, so, or what day is that appointment? Do you need me to drive you there? All these things are the external, emotional, loving support of family and friends. And that's really what we need. The professional is just a guide in that process.
Right.
Um, and so being proactive. So it's been a while, I'm wondering how you're doing, as opposed to, okay, I passed them off, so I'm never going to bring it up again. Then they feel
Right.
like they got this terrible secret and they're walking around in shame. You got to make it
Yeah.
still an open conversation. And when we make it an open conversation, we're saying, this happens to lots of people. People get over it. It's not a big deal. You'll get through it. I'll be here when you do. Hey, how's it going? You
Yeah, I love
know?
that. Yeah. How's your counseling going? They don't have to share the nitty gritty details, but yeah, how's it going? It's a normal part. How's your job? How are you? How are the kids? How's counseling going? It's not
Yeah.
some off limit topic.
Yeah, and then, noticing anything that's encouraging. Say, I've noticed you took a good bath and you're looking, like you're
Mhm.
feeling better because your hair got done or whatever, or you want to play tennis with me because, or whatever basketball, whatever you play, and then you say, I notice you're more engaged or more, tuned in or willing to sit at the dinner table with the family or whatever those things are. We want to comment on those positive lifestyle changes that say you're back, you're you seem more like your real self, your normal self. All those
Yeah.
things are powerful ways of being supportive to people who are in that state.
Yeah, and it's encouraging because sometimes they don't notice it yet. They don't know
Right.
that they're more their normal quote unquote self. So for you to say, "Hey, I really notice you, you did your groceries and you did this and that." Like I'm noticing that you're able to kind of handle more right now and take on more and encouraging them in that. I think too with the positive lifestyle changes, actually being a part of that, knowing that exercise is a huge factor in releasing your endorphins, more serotonin, the happy chemicals. So saying, hey, do you want to go for a walk this evening? Kind of encouraging them to do things that are fun and social, but that you also know benefit them, making them a meal and making it healthier, things like that.
Yeah, I think that's us contributing to their support over the long haul. We're
Right.
we're there for the long haul, and so we're there when you're in a crisis. We're there when you're feeling better. It gives a different kind of a statement, about our engagement with them. And sometimes people are afraid of people who are suicidal. They can be a hot potato, or again afraid to bring it up. So speaking about it, being there along for the healthy changes and all of those things, is really the way we love our friends through these things.
Yeah. All right. Well, anything else on that tip before we move on, Tova?
No, I
No.
know that the last thing I really wanted to talk about is a sad thing, which is how to support people who are what we would call suicide victims, which is the people left behind.
Okay.
And those people who are left behind, that's also a part of suicide awareness that we need to address. And so the big key here is, how do you support someone after a suicide, the people who are left behind, is that we are present without judgment.
Okay.
So there's this thing. The first thing that tends to happen is that there's people want to be a detective. So we find out, and so we're asking the loved ones, well, did they leave a note? Did they tell you? Did you know it was coming? How did you know? Did you think, is it a surprise? What did you do? That detective thing, because it's really about I'm sad to say, it's our voyeurism. We
Mm.
want to know that we could be safe or protect our loved ones. And so we put all that on these poor victims who are having all of those questions all on their own.
Right. Maybe
They're
blaming or confuse themselves. So you're just adding to that, like, oh,
adding,
I should have done something, or I should have known, or yeah.
yeah, did you know? Well, now they're like, well, did I? And
Right.
we compound. They're grieving a loss just like any other death. And we don't want to walk in. Would you do that if someone died by cancer? Oh, so when did the cancer find out? And how did it happen? And were you at their bedside when they were dying? I mean,
Oh my
it's like
goodness.
we would
Yeah.
never do that. And
Mm-mm.
so I think the one key on that and supporting those is to not be a detective. Who
Yeah.
cares? It doesn't matter. It's all
No.
done.
And
It
yeah, it's done. And now it's about attuning to them, being there for them. All of those questions, they really don't matter at this point.
They don't. And then I think another one related to that is to avoid the shame that comes with it. And I've had a number of clients who talk to me about their shame that someone in their family died of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the more we actually just talk about it as if it was something no one could predict or control. You really can't
Right.
predict people's futures. We have this whole thing on awareness because we want to intervene when we can, but none of us are God. We don't see the future.
Yeah.
And people surprise us all the time with suicide, utterly shocking surprises. And so we want to help them not feel ashamed of what wasn't ultimately in their control.
Yeah,
Um,
that's good. Because, yeah, you see, I mean, suicide affects anyone. It's not just those who have no hope, have no life. I mean, it's our pastors, it's our leaders, it's
it is.
people with money. I mean, it's, it affects everyone. So again, yeah, sometimes it is truly a surprise and we didn't have warning signs necessarily.
And even if we did and we got it and there's something else theoretically we could have done, it is what it is.
Right.
It's over. And so we really want to help rescue people from feeling ashamed to talk about it. So like when we come in and we don't ever talk about it, nobody ever says it's a suicide. That is also shaming. It
Right.
implies if it is, you should be ashamed. So therefore you can't talk about it. I've been really impressed with some families who've gone stood up at funerals and said they took their lives
Mm,
versus the ones where they pretend it was something else, and then the
right.
family walks away with, oh, I'm never allowed to really talk about what really happened because
Yeah.
our family's keeping it a secret. And so, there's implied shame, there's direct shame. And so we really want to not do that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. We want to listen with our heart. We want to be present, be patient, respect that it is a unique grief with suicide. It's a grief and loss process for sure, but there's other components that come with that. If someone in the family or friend took their own life. So we want to be very sensitive to that is
yeah.
what I hear you saying.
And we just normalize the normal process of the grief of a loved one, regardless of how they died. We just normalize grief and loss. It is complicated grief and loss, but we just love them the way we would anybody else who lost a loved one. So
Yep.
yeah, thanks for letting me
Very
make those
good.
comments.
Yes. All right. Well, we're going to wrap up. We're nearing the end of our time. Thanks again, Tova. If you want to reach out to her, you can send comments, questions to tova@wellspringmiami.org. That's her direct email. Tova is Tova. We have our website, www.wellspringmiami.org. Go listen to part 1. This was a two-parter, this talk on suicide. Or go to your app on your phone, Wellspring on the Air. So we're going to wrap up for today. Thanks for being with us. I'm Lindsay Steffen with Wellspring on the Air because hearts and minds matter.